Hey, what's up? I hope you guys are doing alright. In today's video, I want to share with you 3 dual amp presets that I've created with the Line 6 Helix software. And these are presets where we've got 2 amp and cabinet combinations that are running in parallel. So we've got one pan left and one pan right, and if you decide to run them in stereo, they sound super big, they sound huge, and it's just not the sound you can get with just one amp cab combo. And likewise, if you decide to pan them back to mono, they really complement each other well in a mono signal as well. So these are going to work well for pretty much anyone. I use the HX Stomp, so these the presets are limited to 6 blocks, but really what all I'm doing here is I'm just going to be showing you the amp and cabinet combination and kind of relaying some of my thoughts and tips to you if you decide to try and create some stuff yourself. So these are going to be 3 totally free presets. You're completely welcome to steal the settings from the screen. That's how all my videos work. But if you want the .hlx file downloads, there's information in the description for that. So back in September, I released the first 3 presets, and to be honest, these are way better just because I've been spending so much time tuning them and really getting them to sound great. I'm working on the Cunard Queen Mary 2. It's a cruise ship. In the theater where I play most of the time, we actually don't have an amp, so I've really been enjoying the Helix amps and cabinets, and really I've been having a ton of fun actually getting to fine-tune stuff and figuring out the right settings, the perfect presets for each of our production shows. With these dual amp setups, I've been using them with some of the guest entertainers we get, so people that are going for more of a rock-ish sound. They're mostly clean presets. One of them has a little bit more drive than I like to use normally with Helix, but it sounds great. But what these are really meant for me to do is to throw some outboard distortion stuff in front of them. So they work great with outboard gear, but I'm sure if you're one of the regular big Helix users that it's going to work well with the built-in distortion and overdrive blocks in the Helix software. My hope that this is going to be a useful video for you in that I'm going to hopefully be sharing some tips and stuff that I've learned myself as I've been creating these presets. I've really spent a lot of time tweaking them with the system in the theater, so I've gotten a good idea of what it sounds like coming out of a really professional sounding system. And as well, I've been playing with an 8-piece band with plenty of horns and keyboards and stuff, so it's they're going to cut through well, and I think they sound great with a full band mix. But I'm going to jump over to HX Edit, and as we're going through everything, I'm going to be playing a couple samples for you, and I'd love to hear from you what you thought of the presets, which one's your favorite, what would you use them for, and everything. And anyway, we'll get started. So in this first preset, we're going to be combining a divided by 13 and a Fender Twin model. You'll see that I'm not using the stock cabinets that go along with those models either, and this is just a way I've kind of further customized the sound so that they really work well together. I'm using the Dr. Z cabinet with the divided by 13 and the matchless H30 cabinet with the Fender Twin. So always start looking at your input impedance. With this guitar, it's a PRS McCarty, kind of low output humbuckers. Basically a Les Paul, but better. And with this guitar, I always go with 1M impedance. Sometimes with my single coil guitars like my Strat or my Tele, I'll go down to 230K, but I usually like to stay at 1M with this. So I just have, with some of these presets, I have effects in it too that I've customized, and this is not really anything special, they're just effects. I mean, the stuff in Helix is very easy to manipulate, but if you want to steal those, there's the settings for the phaser. That was on the bridge pickup, by the way. And then this is how I'm dividing the paths. So we're running 2 amps again in parallel. Balance A set to the left, this is the divided by 13 combo. Balance B set to the right, this is the Fender Twin. Let's look at the settings for the divided by 13. I should say first off that this preset has more gain than a lot of my other presets do, so it's not a completely clean sound. And for that reason, I think it really works well with adding some outboard distortion and stuff in front of it. Here's the clean sound on the bridge pickup. And that is both amps together. I'm going to single them out here. Let's do just the divided by 13. This is what it sounds like by itself. So kind of mid-scooped a little bit, but I think it sounds great. These are all my settings. Drive I have set to foot switch 3, and I'll get to that in a second. But basically, I think when you start adding some gain in the Helix amps, this hum setting down here, it kind of becomes useful. It doesn't seem to get in the way very much, but it just kind of gets the distortion to sound a little bit more natural in my mind. And likewise with the sag control, this is where you can start kind of coloring the sound of the overdrive from the amp. The higher it goes, the more compression you're getting, the lower it goes, the tighter it is. And it's a really useful control, I found. Bias kind of works in the same way, so the lower the bias is, the more overdrive you're getting. And the higher up it goes, the colder it sounds. So here's the divided by 13. Again, I'll play it on the neck for a second. If you're hearing a little bit of reverb, it's coming from some outboard units. I have the Empress stuff over here in the effects loop later. And let's hear the Fender Twin by itself on the neck pickup. And the bridge. So let's combine these amps in parallel again, and you can hear what they sound like together, how they work together. We're going to go with the bridge pickup now, no external overdrive or anything. Neck. Alright, so looking at the settings now, if you decided you like that sound, you want to cop it, these are the settings for the divided by 13 amp head. And then the Dr. Z, I went with the 87, the U87 model microphone, distance 2 inches back, so you're getting a pretty rounded sound here. The closer you go on the distance, the more bass you're going to get, and the further back, you're going to get a thinner sound. But sometimes it's useful to kind of combine these. If you're running 2 amps, run one at a closer distance than the other, just to kind of fill out the space where the other one's lacking. Low cut, always around 75 or 90 or something like that. High cut can be very useful. In the 2.8 update, Line 6 made it standard that all of the amps came with a high cut setting already on it. So like before the 2.8 update, all of the amps had the high cut turned off, and you had to add that in yourself if you wanted. I think they decided it just pretty much always sounds better with a high cut on. So I set that at 7.8. Here's what it sounds like when it's off. It's subtle, but if you have good headphones or speakers, you're going to hear some extra noise that we don't really need. It's not useful to the sound of the guitar that we're going for. So just throw the high cut on around that area. Early reflections is at 5%, and we'll compare that later to the Fender Twin. And then finally, I set the level here to 1.6 decibels, and this is so I'm getting a balanced signal going out of both amps, so that I don't have one headphone louder than the other, and it doesn't sound like my guitar is panned to one side. So keep the level of both amps even. Now we'll look at the Fender settings. Overdrive pretty high on it. Bass mid-cut to get that typical Fender Twin sound. Presence, here's some sag, the hum controls. I keep the ripple on minimum because I've noticed there's kind of this weird like subtone that happens when you turn up the ripple setting. Really noticeable on single note lines, and you'll need headphones to hear that, but it's kind of like this weird, I don't know, it's not a good sound for me, so I keep ripple off on all of my presets. Here's the cabinet setting for the Twin. Mic, I went with the 121 ribbon, distance at 1.5 inches, not too much different from the other. The low cut considerably higher on here because I'm playing with a little bit more bass than I'm used to. So I use the bass control to kind of shape the sound of the guitar, and then throw in the low cut to get rid of all that bass that we don't actually need in that range. High cut is again at 7.8 kilohertz, And then the early reflections is at 15%. So when I create these dual amp presets, I like to set one with a lower percentage early reflection and the other with a higher percentage. And this kind of gets a little bit of a panning effect, although both sides actually are at the same volume. When you have one sounding a little bit before the other, you get a really cool stereo spread. And so with all my amp presets, the dual amp stuff, I always do this early reflection technique. It kind of just gives it a wider sound. And then I go and I blend it back. So they're not all the way panned left and right when I bring it back together. I bring it down to 85% to the left and 85% to the right. So they're bleeding into each other a little bit. And again, if you're running mono, if you only attach a single cable coming out of your Helix unit on update, it'll sum all your channels to mono for you. So this stuff won't really matter. But this is just what I like to do now. And then level, I boost that to 6 decibels so that we have unity gain running from the start of the chain through the end. Sorry I'm getting long-winded here, but the other two presets, they'll go a little bit faster. Here's just a tremolo effect that I have. Stereo, of course, going back and forth. And with all my presets, always a volume patch and the stereo effects loop. Alright, so I'll give you a little playing sample of that in a second, and then we'll start moving on to the other presets. Alright, looking at preset number 2, I'm combining a jazz chorus and a Fender Twin model. I really love the Fender Twin model, if you can't tell from my other presets up here. But I'm combining the Roland Jazz Chorus and a Fender Twin to get a much cleaner sound here. This is my favorite out of the three. It's very useful. And anyway, I'll show you the settings. Again, the impedance, set that as what sounds best to you. I'll get back to that effect later. Again, split the amps left and right. And then what we have is the Jazz Chorus combo paired with the typical cabinet here. Here's my settings for the Jazz Chorus. Let's isolate that. I'm on the neck pickup. And then let's isolate the Twin. So both these amps are pretty much in the same ballpark of tone, but when you're combining different amps, it's good to have them sound just a little bit different. So the Roland is a little bit more filled out, and the Twin, again, has the characteristic Fender Twin scooped sound. I boosted the mids a little bit so it's not so drastic, but when we combine them together, you're really going to hear a great sound out of them both. I'm keeping the drive, this is really important by the way, keeping the overdrive of both amps around the same volume. Now, if you're panning them mono, it's not going to matter so much, but if you're panning them left and right, if you have one amp that's much more distorted than the other, it's going to become obvious. When you start playing chords, it's going to sound off balance. You're going to get a much more sustaining sound on one side than the other. Alright, so looking at the settings for the Jazz Chorus, again, keep the drive low. And then looking at the cabinet, I went with the 160 ribbon mic, distance 1.5 inches. Here's my high cut and low cut settings and the early reflections at 5% for this. And then, again, here's the Fender Twin settings. And then for the cabinet, I use the U87 condenser microphone, distance 2 inches back. And then these high and low cut settings. Again, early reflections, 15% instead of 5%, like I mentioned in the last preset. Blend them back together, 85. And I did a little bit of level correction here with A level and B level. By the way, if you decide to take this preset and you're using it with some of my other presets, I have everything set up so they're all running at the same output volume. So if you decide to switch between stuff during a set, the sound guy doesn't have to work too much to fix the mix. Let's hear the effects quick on this preset. Here's the filter settings if you decide to take that. off. I have that controlled with foot switch 1, by the way. Foot switch 2 is, again, a stereo tremolo. If you throw some reverb on before that, it sounds pretty cool. And by the way, the harmonic tremolo is controlled with foot switch 2. I should mention that on all of my presets that I've created ever, foot switch 3 is always a boost, so you can always rely on that if you need to cut out a little bit, cut through the mix a little bit more for a solo section in a band mix. You can see all the different controls here I've set to foot switch 3, and this will give you a 6 decibel boost to help you really pump through. Alright, so I'll do a little bit of a demo with this preset now, and then we'll move on to preset number 3. Preset number 3 is going to be combining a PRS Archon with a high watt model. I really love the Archon model in the Helix software, but it works well back to back with the high watt. So let's start by looking at the Archon, I guess. I'm using the clean variant with a 4x12 Cali V30 cabinet. These are my settings for that, and let's hear what that sounds like by itself. This is kind of somewhere in between the first and second preset, so a little bit more gain, but not so much of a full bassy sound. That was the bridge pickup, neck. If any of my presets ever sound thin to you over your headphones or the speaker system that you're using, that's because I've purposely tweaked them to get rid of some of the bass content so it doesn't really get in the way of a full band mix. This is something that you need to do with your presets if you're playing out live with a full band. And if you just have too much bass in the mix, it's going to muddy up the entire overall mix of the band. And really what the guitar should be is a mid and treble instrument, and that's kind of your role in the band. Now, if you're playing by yourself, it sounds really good if you turn up the bass, so I understand why people like to do that. Maybe if you're practicing with headphones or in your bedroom just by yourself, sure, turn up the bass, but when you go out to play live, turn it down a little bit so you're not getting in the way of other instruments. Alright, and let's listen to what the high watt sounds like by itself. We're on the neck pickup again. Now I do have a lot more bass in this, but I've made up for it with the 4x10 combo and a bit of a low cut. You can hear that there's a very distinct, like, mid-focused sound to this, and it's going to work really well with the PRS Archon's, like, overall warm, very full sound. Let's play on the bridge pickup now. Alright, so let's put them back in parallel and we'll see how they work together. Alright, so back up, make sure you set your input impedance. Again, if you didn't already, don't ever forget to do that. That's important. The deluxe phaser is the same as before, no point going on there. It's triggered with foot switch 1. And then we're splitting the amps left and right as we did in the past. The Archon is on the left. These are the settings for the amp model. I turned the ripple down and I kept the hum pretty low too, just because I'm not using much actual amp overdrive in this preset. The depth was an interesting control. That kind of adds, I have played a real Archon actually, and it's a really useful control. It adds a lot of bass to it, so I kept that pretty low. I just didn't think there was any real reason to include that. Maybe if you're playing in more of a jazz setting or in a solo setting or as a jazz trio where there's only 3 instruments, that's where adding in a lot of bass content can help your sound. But generally, if you're playing with a bigger band, I like to keep as little bass in there as possible while still retaining a nice tone. Alright, and then the cabinet here, the Cali V30. Mic is the 121 ribbon. Again, distance is 4 inches back. So the Archon model puts out a lot more bass end than a lot of the other models. And to compensate for that, I've backed the microphone up 4 inches. You can hear that if I make it closer, you're going to get a lot more bass response. Versus if it's further away. That's something you'll need headphones to really listen in for. The low cut at 80 Hertz, high cut at 7.8 again. Early reflections, I set that to 0. And then we'll look at the high watt. Here's the settings for that, nothing too surprising. I used the 4x10 Fender Tweed combo for it. As I mentioned before, I added a lot of bass into this preset, so I made up for it with 10-inch speakers. I used the U87 condenser microphone for that. Distance is a little bit closer. Low cut 95, and then high cut at 5.5. Early reflection 0. I didn't go too far into the reflection game on this one. I think it sounds pretty good as is. But if you want to experiment with that, of course you can add the reflections like I did on the other presets. Again, foot switch 3 is controlling a solo boost. So we have level on each of the cabinets and then drive on each of the amp heads being affected there. My normal volume block, effects loop block, and then we have a different tremolo actually. I'll play this one, triggered with foot switch 2. Faster on a kind of a vibrato setting, panning left to right like the other one did, but just a different character to it. So now I'm going to give you a little playing sample of the third preset. I hope this video was helpful for you. If you're interested in picking up my complete Helix library, I have some information down in the description. Basically, I've set up a PayPal account. My videos are always free and they always will remain free, but I've had people reach out and say they'd rather have an HLX file in return for some way they can support me. And so I set up a donation link. So it's a donation of any amount. Usually people do like $5. That's what's suggested. And you get instant access and an unlimited lifetime access to basically what is a Google Drive folder that I throw all of my presets up into when I update them or when I create new ones. So in other words, it's a one-time donation fee of whatever amount you would choose, and it's a lifetime's access to my ever-evolving library of amps and preset sounds with the Helix stuff. I've been having a ton of fun using these presets, and if you enjoyed these, maybe check out the video I did back in September where I did 3 other presets, dual amp presets. And likewise, stay tuned for more Helix videos coming out. I'm always putting out new presets for you, so hopefully something else will be useful to you in the future. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.